You're now listening to The Bryan Callen Show, rated the #1 podcast of all time.
Of all time. Make sure you're ready, because this is the podcast where you are guaranteed to learn virtually everything. This is Bryan Callen and my colleague Hunter Motz, and this is the Bryan Callen Show. And let me go through my dates before when we talk about our lovely guest. I'm going to be at Donnie B's. Donnie B's, ladies and gentlemen, in Springfield, Illinois, the 4th and the 5th. I think it's even the 4th and the 5th. No idea what that club's like. They're just paying me a lot, and I'm excited. And then October 11th and 12th and 13th, I'm going to be at the Houston Improv. And then October 17th, 18th, 19th, I'm going to be at Helium in Buffalo. Can't wait to be in Buffalo in October. Woohoo! Gray, snow. It's going to be amazing. Can't wait to get drunk. And then Calgary, Alberta. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Enough about me. We got Karen Karbo on the line. Karen, I love your writing. I love how you get to the point. And I want to say something. If anybody, women are always a mystery. You guys are a mystery. But if you want to learn about women, I would say it's a fair thing to say that reading your book, especially Julia Child Rules or any of the Coco Chanel, you focus on these powerful women. And it's, when you hear that as a guy, you're like, I don't want to read about Coco Chanel and fashion. It has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with people who chose to live on their own terms.
Exactly.
And distill and get to the essence of what it is to live a life, a meaningful and full life. And
Bryan, you got it. You have it all.
There it is, and that's the end. That's the end of the interview, ladies and gentlemen. We did it.
Bryan, you peaked in the first few minutes.
I sure did.
You've never done that before, have you?
But I've also read your blogs, Karen. I love the way you just get to the bottom of it. You're just a straight shooter and honest about it, and it's very refreshing. Very refreshing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I try.
Why Coco Chanel? Why Julia Child? Why these women?
There's sort of the prime time answer, and then there's the real answer. So
I like the real answer. See,
the real answer is somewhat sad. The prime time answer, I'll do that really quickly.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've written these 4 what I call kick-ass women books. The first was Katharine Hepburn.
Yep.
Coco Chanel, Georgia O'Keefe, and now Julia Child.
Right.
What attracts me to these women is, as you said, and really whether they were male or female, they lived life to the fullest. They lived to great old age. They had second acts and third acts and fourth acts, and they just kept going, and they did. They lived life completely on their own terms. And they also changed 20th century culture. So those were the sort of things that really attracted me to them. But, on a kind of, more somber note, my mother died when I was young, and I think one of the great things that attracted me to them is they became very old bags, old opinionated bags, and I sort of never had that in my life. So that's kind of the deep psychological reason.
That's really interesting. And so as they got older, they became sort of shadows of themselves. They kind of I guess hubris took over and things. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no. It's actually what happened is most of them kind of faded from view a little bit, and then when they were like really old, they had these comebacks.
Yeah.
They had comebacks. Julia actually did not become. when she started on The French Chef, she was 50 years old.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I knew she was middle-aged, and I love the way you describe how sort of guerrilla tactics, how they started this whole thing.
Oh,
with the
it's
dad,
amazing.
with her husband doing the dishes, and they'd bring their own stuff before dawn. It's great.
Yeah, they paid for the food, and sometimes after the show they would auction off what they had made to help defer expenses.
That's what's interesting is I don't think Julia Child had any idea she was going to be an American icon.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. And that's another thing that I think, for all of us kind of living in contemporary times is that, she lived her life from the inside out.
Right.
I think so many of us, we are so kind of inundated with everything that's on the outside, and we try and sort of adapt to what's coming at us instead of generating what's inside of us.
Well, as you're saying that, I was thinking about the phenomenon that is Kim Kardashian, or even Lady Gaga, who I don't think would be as popular if it wasn't for her innovative costumes and sort of the spectacle. It's not so much about her music, and for that matter, even Madonna. And,
right.
And I wonder what context you put those things in, those women in, because I think there's nothing interesting to me about Kim Kardashian, and here's why. She's never accomplished anything.
It's amazing, isn't it? I
yeah.
mean, it's a big mystery why we continue to be I could understand sort of a one-off, like here's this crazy chick that did this thing, but we seem to have this enduring fascination, and I don't understand how it endures.
I don't either. I guess it's the equivalent of watching pornography, maybe, or
porn.
Yeah, something like that, or maybe it's just.
Well, I think the other thing too is that in order to appreciate people of substance, you have to have substance yourself. And I think that's if you look at sort of what happens to popular culture across the course of civilizations, it tends to become more and more gaudy, more and more about spectacle and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that's the thing is that, to appreciate a woman who, at the age of 50, writes a book that's 1,200 pages because she's like, this is the way that cooking should be done, and the book needs to be 1,200 pages. And I'm not going to compromise on that. You in some sense have to have, had to have a vision of your own that you were willing to commit that much to and to really appreciate that.
But I don't know that it's an indictment on people who don't have substance, in the sense that I think, in fact, it's a cultural shift where it's no longer sort of relevant, people think, to reach beyond themselves. Everything seems to come back to the person, yourself, the individual. It's all niche stuff that so. But it might. I mean, back in the day, I think Harper's ran an article about how the Toledo housewife. She was a housewife, but she was interested in what was going on, and she read at least about what was going on in the opera scene in New York, even though she'd never been into New York.
Well, and also French cooking.
Yeah.
We kind of we look now at kind of the Food Network and celebrity chefs and all of these things that we sort of take for granted. But if you dial it way back to 1960, when Mastering the Art of French Cooking came out, it was not a done deal that housewives were going to say, oh, look, 36 pages on how to make beef bourguignon, which I can't even pronounce. I'm going for it. Yeah. It was TV dinners, and I remember my mother was a huge French chef aficionado, and in fact, it sort of killed me because when I was really little, I was on all these sports teams, and I would come home and I would be starving, and we would not eat until 8:30 because she was deglazing and she was, braising and all of sauces, and it was sort of horrible. But the point is it was not, it was not just obvious that this is something, But to your point, the housewife chauffeur, which is how Julia Child referred to them. And by the way, they haven't changed. It's still the housewife chauffeur.
Yeah.
Housewife chauffeurs embraced, this kind of whiff of the continent, this whiff of Europe, this whiff of something larger than themselves. And I know, like my mom, it did give her a sense of accomplishment and a sense of pleasure. And by the way, she had to feed us anyway.
Right. Right.
She had to feed us anyway. And so why not, make something that you're proud of and make something sort of interesting and
Well, by the way, you also are eloquent in describing or arguing for the fact that when a woman is really good in the kitchen and is an expert at creating a house, I know for me, that turns me on. And I know a lot of guys in 2013. And by the way, I'm not a chauvinist. I swear to God, I'm a feminist.
I believe you.
I'm a feminist in that if you are of the same merit, then you deserve all the accolades. One of the people I admire the most, who's a friend of mine, is Ronda Rousey, who's the UFC champion. And Ronda is just such a badass and is not about to be the girl who sits in the kitchen and cooks for you and does all that stuff. But so I look forward to her fights as much as I look forward to any guy's fight. on the planet. But having said that, there is nothing wrong with, and it's really difficult to be a great chef and to stay in shape and to have sex with your partner, and that kind of thing. The marriage is a verb, man. Marriage is a verb.
Absolutely. And in fact, I have to do a sidebar here. Not even about Julia, but I collaborated on a book with Gabrielle Reese.
Oh, wow, I know Gabby, yeah.
Yeah, and it came out in April, and she talks about a lot of this. She's married to, big wave surfer Laird Hamilton.
Yeah, the stud. The biggest stud.
The archetypal stud, yeah.
The one, I produce estrogen every time I see that guy.
I know, right?
I mean, I remember the first time, because I worked with Gabby on a TV show, and the first time I saw them walk in together before I knew her, it was at the Firehouse in Venice. I'd never seen human beings. I was just like, I want to be a fly on the wall. I wish I was invisible so I could watch them have sex.
And you were a fly on the wall,
I sure was.
We are all flies on the wall.
Oh my God, it's so true. I was like, what happened to me? I never grew. I thought I was athletic.
No, I know. No, I was always the tall one, and I wrote this book with Gab, and so I was like the little teeny, withered specimen of humanity. But anyway, she said in her book something similar. She's in the female role, and she provides the food, and she really got a lot of grief for it. A lot. Right. A lot of grief for saying essentially what you've just said.
But there's nothing that's a noble thing. There's a lot of power in that, by the way.
Well, also I don't quite understand if you want to be married and be in a partnership, don't you want to make that happy? And everybody's got to eat, usually 3 times a day, and I don't know, I'm not quite sure where all the controversy came from.
Well, tell us about these powerful women. I know Kate Hepburn had such a deep love for Spencer Tracy. I mean, she devotes an entire chapter I think she opens the chapter with Spencer Tracy. I loved Spencer Tracy.
She did.
And he used to drink, and he would find himself in hotel rooms, and he'd sit in a bathtub and drink himself to oblivion over 3 days, and she would find him. And
a lot of the reasons he still continued to get cast is because the studios knew that she came with him. That she would make sure that he was sober and he would show up on the set.
That's right. And she used to sleep at the foot of his bed and just nurse him back to health. That's one of the most romantic chapters and things I've ever read in my life, man. I had such and you want to talk about a badass. Katharine Hepburn, I mean, I just see her with a shotgun on her porch, ready to take on all comers.
Whether it's like the African Queen. I mean, there's a great story about when she was the African Queen and they were in Botswana or Congo or wherever they were, and the costume department for the movie consisted of Katharine Hepburn carrying the full-length mirror under her arm and propping it against a tree. That was like,
wow.
But
she was a real discipline. Yeah, well, tell us. I'm sorry that I went off on that, but tell us about these women and how they for listeners and what their philosophy was on all things man and woman and how they navigated their relationships.
Well, like all human beings, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't a slam dunk.
Right.
One thing that has been pointed out to me is that none of these women had children, which of course makes their lives different than many of the lives of my readers. But I think it was complicated. I think Coco Chanel was French, and that kind of puts her. Like, she was all about, like, nobody was more badass than Coco Chanel, but she was all about, like, the man and the woman, and I'm sort of the little lady, but, she didn't, she would give lip service to that, but she didn't really act like that. And maybe perhaps, that's the French way, but she did talk about it a lot. Georgia O'Keeffe had an incredibly complicated and mutually beneficial relationship with Alfred Stieglitz. And not necessarily a happy marriage, but I'll tell you one thing. O'Keeffe was so far ahead of her time. She was like on Mars. I mean, she was a completely different beast than Julia Child, but Stieglitz really saw her as she wanted to be seen.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I think
because I've always said that men. Well, I always tell women, I say this in my stand-up, I say, look, men want to be admired. They just want to be admired. I think they're looking for their mother. Their mother looks at them when the minute they come out with the biggest, most adoring eyes. And if I don't care, I always talk about dick size. I get silly, but I mean, if the guy has a mushroom cap and you love him, act like it's the biggest thing you've ever seen.
Absolutely.
Because that make a lot of noise in bed. We don't want to hear you laughing. We don't want to hear you go, oh. We want to hear you. I want to hear you catching your breath. I can't take it. It's too much. Listen, that's how guys are, and none of us are immune to it. I do this joke where I say I dated a girl for a long time. I couldn't break up with her because she sounded like she was falling out of a building when we and she was Cuban. I couldn't get enough of it. I was like, I literally was like, I'm a hero. I can't break up with this girl.
That's why you put up with women who, by the way, are sometimes extremely difficult to put up with.
Oh my God, are you kidding? I move them into my house. I don't care if they have track marks and a bat tattooed to their face. I'll pay all their bills. I'll date them for at least 2 years.
It's true. And by the way, getting back to Julia Child, she and Paul had, one of the most successful and admired marriages of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, on paper they didn't look like they went together.
Yeah,
but when they hooked up, they were a team like no other. I mean, one of the things that's kind of extraordinary is that before the French chef, he was in the foreign service, and she would sort of move around from place to place to place, to Paris, to Marseille, somewhere in Germany, and she was like the wife, and she would cook, and she would entertain, traveling dignitaries and all that. And the second her star rose, he became the wife.
Wow. Yeah, that says a lot about him.
And, I don't think it was completely without bumps. I'm not trying to suggest that he was like, oh, sure, honey, now you're the man and I'm the woman. But they were such a team.
I think sometimes, that I dated Fiona Apple for a little while, and I remember realizing very quickly that Fiona was just a better artist than I was. Like, she was just clearly was on a level artistically as a songwriter, just as a painter and as a human being that I really believe in a lot of ways she was just a better person. I had no problem just being in a position of total admiration. I used to just I almost felt like my ego's way too big, by the way, and I'm just too much of a type A personality, but I can see, even for someone like me, I can see kind of taking a back seat and kind of letting this creature shine, when you're with a force of nature. And Julia Child was. I like the way you describe how sort of, she would rage and she would cry and she would throw, she was so human. Yeah. Yet she was able to accomplish all this stuff. Yet she had a profound influence on American culture. And the
other, the thing that I say in the book that I think it comes down to it, and I'm not sure, and I'd be interested to hear if if guys kind of feel the same way, but Julia was not a woman divided against herself. And I think when you're a human being and you are not divided against yourself, when you're not saying, I'm doing this, but I should be doing that. Oh, look. Oh, I made a mistake. That if you're just moving forward with the force of your passion and personality, that you can really accomplish great things. And like I said, to me, being female, I see a lot of women that are always just sort of questioning everything that's going on, and it hamper. You hamper yourself that way.
Well, that you're speaking my religion now. Yeah. And I one of the things that my wife and I had a long talk about, and it was, I said, I have a passion. You've got to find a passion. She found horseback riding.
Oh, we're a horse family. So
it's amazing. And when it was so important for our relationship, because even though she's gone 4 hours of the day, and if it costs a fortune, my business manager was
like having a yacht.
Oh, my business manager was like, you're leasing a horse? What are you, a land baron now? I was like, and I said to him, I'll do whatever it takes to afford that horse, because it's a huge part of why it keeps our marriage dynamic, because now she can speak my language. When you're trying to get better at something, you hit plateaus, you have peaks, you have valleys. There is common ground there, because she has a passion, I have a passion, and we can meet in the middle, and that's really important, man.
Well, and I think that that's the other thing too, is that I think all of us can currently in the culture sort of throw around this word passion, and there's somewhat of an assumption that what you're passionate about you also have an aptitude for. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that's kind of wonderful about Julia is that, she found cooking and she fell in love with it, but she at the end of the day, she didn't have any natural talent.
She wasn't. Yeah, that's right.
Her love of it, and she allowed herself to make mistakes, a lot of them. And it's almost comical.
Well, you say her favorite hors d'oeuvre was Pepperidge Farm goldfish.
I think it was because I don't know. People ask me why. Like I have some, I don't know why. I think it was because she was always sort of focusing on the meal. I mean, she also bought a lot of store-bought desserts too.
Amazing.
So I think actually the meal kind of was really her focus, and she also especially when she lived in Cambridge, she invited a lot of people in the neighborhood to come over and cook, and it was a very communal activity. And I think maybe just tossing out the goldfish was sort of an easier way to focus on the meal. Or
history. But it also speaks to another thing, and I thought it was really I love this about. First of all, I read your blog about. I think it was your blog about how you go about writing, and you're like talking about how you're paralyzed, but because you're writing the greatest novel ever. In fact, Jonathan Franzen is going to be like, what am I doing on the cover of Time magazine?
He's going to come and be so embarrassed.
I love that so much because that's exactly how I feel every time I try to write a script or something. But
right, isn't it like, oh, this is it?
Yes, of course. I'm gonna. By the way, I don't know where I'm gonna put my Oscar, but
all your Oscars.
Well, I'm actually having shelves made now. but you talk about Julia Child, who was not. Her motto was, I think she said something to the effect of less learning and more moonshine.
Yeah.
And she really didn't know what she was getting herself into. She kind of just would go, and it would appear. Talk about that a little bit, because you've learned how to do that as a writer, and Julia Child did that. She just found. She didn't think about it too much. She just did it and figured her way through. Now, obviously, writing is a craft. You want to outline and stuff like that. You don't want to just start writing, But talk a little bit about that.
The important thing, and I also teach writing, and so it's dialing it back to where it becomes fun and engaging for you.
Mm.
So for some people, they can still say, "Oh, this book is going to be great," and it doesn't hamper them. Some people, you have to say, "Look, if these 3 paragraphs that I write today make any kind of sense in the English language, then I have done my job." And if that reduces the anxiety and reduces your attachment to the outcome, then that's good. So and I think that Julia was always, even though she was working on this massive cookbook, she was always just, and it's one of the rules in the book, is solve the problem in front of you. How do I make this mayonnaise not curdle? How do I make?
I had a thought. I had a thought. You write this series on kick-ass women, and to that point, I thought to myself, if all these women sat down to have dinner, I bet you Julia Child would be the one cooking, and she probably wouldn't be engaged in the conversation, say, between Kate Hepburn, George O'Keefe, and Coco Chanel. I think those 3 would have probably either fierce arguments or have an amazing time. What do you think a dinner would be like with the 4 of them?
I have actually thought about this more than you might imagine. And, I think it would not actually be a happy time. They were all they were incredibly opinionated. You guys have to, if you get a minute, and I know I'm sure you have copious amounts of free time, but there's a Dick Cavett interview with Katharine Hepburn that is just, she was scheduled to go on his show, and instead she came the day before to check out the set to see if she was going to say yes or no.
Yep.
And Dick Cavett happened to stop by. I mean, literally, he's like on the way to his boat, and he's wearing like white pants and white deck shoes, and she says, "Okay, let's do it now."
Yeah.
And there was a cameraman on hand, and they did it, and she is so judgmental, and Dick Cavett is so funny, and
I saw the interview,
the furniture and the rug, and I just think if all 4 of them sat down, that they would, the degree to which they could not find common ground would make your head spin.
Wow. So Coco would be judging Catherine's slacks.
Well, yeah, that, I mean...
And Julia Child's cooking. Because she's French, and she'd be like, how dare this American try to cook?
Well, absolutely. And Coco Chanel also said, I mean, she was not in any way a foodie. She said, I eat standing up like a racehorse. So Coco, even though so she was like all about her work.
Yeah. But none of them had children. I wonder if there was regret for that.
Well, there's different thinking. I mean, Georgia wanted kids. Stieglitz already had a daughter with whom he enjoyed a very complicated and difficult relationship, and he was 24 years older, so he wasn't in for that. Julia and Paul wanted children. Well, actually, Julia wanted children, and it just didn't work out. And, in those days, you either adopted or you just lived with your fate. So she did. And in fact, she never really talked much about it except for when she was, I think, in her 90s. And she mentioned to a friend that it would have been nice, to have had a grandchild or two in her deep old age. But really, she felt sad about it. There's actually a lovely little scene in Julie and Julia where Meryl Streep as Julia Child finds out that her sister Dort is pregnant, and she cries a little, and Paul holds her. And I think that was probably an accurate representation. I think she did feel very sad, but life rolled on, and she was always going to be in the center of life. So
right,
yeah.
Who is the woman in that group that you think you'd like to have dinner with before anybody else? And who did you you've written books about these women. Who did you find that you admire the most?
Well, I have to say, I look at Georgia O'Keeffe, and she was so aspirational. Mm-hmm. I mean, but she was an artistic genius, and I think anytime you look at a genius, it's like you're really looking at someone on the other side of, the room. I mean, it's like, you are awesome out there, but so, and a difficult person. I mean, I had actually wanted to write Julia Child rules right after the Katharine Hepburn book, but my publisher pointed out that was right when Julie and Julia was in production, and so it was like, I think we have enough Julia Child out there. So the thing about Julia is that she really was every woman.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, if you look at, Katharine Hepburn, for whatever her acting talents were, photographed exquisitely. That bone structure, you're just
amazing.
Like born with it. So forget that. Coco Chanel, had this epic rags to riches story, and happened to be born at a time when she caught a lot of breaks, and she had an exquisite taste, and again a sort of genius.
Yeah.
But Julia Child was like all of us, didn't find her métier until she was in her late 30s. Really had a lot of and it's so funny because we talk now about a lot of youngins in their 20s and like failure to launch and what's going on, and that was totally Julia.
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Late
she was
bloomer.
a really crappy student at Smith. She liked to party. That was, the only thing that inspired her to get her grades up is that if when you were a senior you had a BA average, you could have a car.
Oh, that's great.
And she got her car, and she took everybody to speakeasy.
She was a bit of a hedonist, I guess.
A total hedonist.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so interesting that she became obsessed with French cooking, which is so demanding and disciplined, and it has such a history. And
I love cooking and sex, but I'm just a lot more muscular and a lot leaner than she was. And I just want to throw that out there, Karen. Keep going. It's not about me. It's not about me.
Julia loved men in the kitchen. Like she, when she became older and sort of there were all these like young dude chefs coming up.
Yeah.
She was friends with them all. She mentored them all. And she really wanted, cooking to be sort of more of an equal opportunity activity.
Right.
So she would have liked Tony Bourdain and so forth. She would just love it all.
I love Bourdain. I love Bourdain. Well, I guess the great chefs were always men, at least in France.
Yeah, and you know what they say? The great chefs were always men, and they had a grandma back in the village where they got all their recipes from.
That is exactly right, by the way. I've talked to great chefs in New York and L.A., and they all say that. They all say, well, I had a mother or I had a grandmother. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
Right,
Makes total sense.
Yeah, no, and, Julia, I mean, not everybody loved, we loved Julia. Not everyone loved Julia. People, even in this country said, she's not French, she's not a chef. Yeah. Why does a housewife need to learn to cook haute cuisine? You know, that she had a very populist streak.
Yeah.
And not everyone thought that was cool, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, but she really was.
Well, she also had, you know, if you were to choose someone, I can just see the auditions today in these reality shows where they're looking for the next Iron Chef. And you had a woman who spoke this way the whole time. I doubt that she would have made it. I mean, there's no way that they would have chosen her. You know, she was kind of like she kind of defied all odds in that sense.
Well, and I think too, you know, and if you look at where we are and how sort of, you know, self-conscious, self-promoting, whatever you want to call it. But, you know, when she was on TV, like, she and Paul didn't even have a TV.
I know.
You know, when they said, "Oh, come and be on this TV show," they were like, "Well, this is a weird thing. Okay, now I have to like move, cook, look in the camera." I mean, it was a skill set that she was just very engaged in mastering. But
yeah, she would rehearse with her husband the night before, right?
Yep, for hours. They would stay up way late. And, you know, and remember, I mean, if you go back and look at the early French chef, the mistakes that she would make on camera, and because it was a single take, it's crazy, but it's also instructive because it's part of what we really dug about her.
Yeah. Well, and there are those
part of what gave people the courage to cook is that, oh, look, I burnt this. Oh, well, it gives a nice effect. Yes, we'll just move this to the side. Not to worry. And I think that was really inadvertently what made people fall in love with her.
Yeah, it's kind of like watching.
So human.
Yeah, it's kind of like watching race car. You know, races and people. They say people go to NASCAR to see a crash, not to see somebody win.
Yeah, well,
yeah, I mean, you know, it's kind of more.
Burn the French onion soup. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, the outrage! It's so exciting. Look at that! Look at that smoke. She's toasted the cheese.
Yeah, no, it was, and like I said, we when I was researching the book, I watched them over and over again, and some of the malaprops and the misspeakings, and you know, also just the technologically how hilarious it is. One time the camera's like panning across, and I don't know what happened with the cameraman, but the camera suddenly flipped up and looking at the ceiling, and then it's like, oh, whoops, and then it tries to find focus again. It's just hugely entertaining.
What's your take on Martha Stewart?
Martha's historically.
Well, I mean, I don't know. She strikes me as probably someone who's very ambitious. The opposite of Julia Child in the sense that she seemed very calculated, very ambitious, maybe a bit of a narcissist, and not the warmest character if you actually look at the way she behaves.
Right. Well, you know, I think, you know, Martha couldn't have been Martha without Julia, right?
Yep.
So, you know, I look at someone who had these kind of domestic skills, which, you know, I do have to hand it to her. She found a way to leverage these domestic skills at a time when, you know, in the 80s, the pendulum was sort of on the other side, right? Women were going to work. They were wearing their power suits.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, but that said, the kind of, the rampant sort of careerism is very evident.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I don't mean to knock it, and maybe I was a little unfair in my characterization, but not somebody you'd want to write a book about because she came along. She didn't have the same impact, is what you're saying.
Well, she did. I mean, like I said, she you know, you got to hand her success to her because she really, you know, created this empire sort of out of nothing, and I'm always, you know, enamored of that, and I always admire that. But, you know, Julia was very clear. You know, she wrote these books. She stayed with WGBH, the educational station in Boston, long after she got offers from the networks because she said, I am an educator, and I'm throwing my lot in with the educators. So she
you're talking Martha Stewart was?
No,
Julia.
So Julie had a very clear mission and a very clear sense of herself as a cooking teacher. So when you think of a teacher, you think of, you know, it's about other people.
Yeah.
You know, yes, okay, so Martha Stewart, you're making a beautiful table and this very fussy cake, but it's kind of about presentation. It's not really about, giving you the tools to make your life better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think the other interesting thing is, all of these kick-ass women books are really about lessons on living, right?
Yeah. Yep.
There's so many books that are about succeeding in your career or mastering something or anything like that. And, I think what's so great about these books is they're really about how to have a great life. And I think that's also the real
Which is relevant for men, by the way.
Absolutely.
That's the thing.
That's a universal. And I think that's, for example, as an educator, Julia's decision to remain an educator, may not produce the most money in the world, but it does provide a much more satisfying way to live.
Yeah. And, that's the other thing, Hunter, that's actually a great point. And I was, I'm always reminded in working on these books, that we all live the 24 hours of our days. And I think especially, because these women, became not just celebrities but also icons that we still have, attachment to, how they lived those 24 hours, whether things were going well for them, whether things were frustrating for them. Like all humans, they suffered a lot of setbacks, they suffered disappointment, people died, people got sick, things didn't go the way they thought they were going to go, and yet they still managed to be in their lives, be in the moment, make the best of it, get through it.
Did they all die fabulously wealthy?
No.
They didn't?
No. No. Coco Chanel, who you would think would be the richest, actually was not that rich. Most of her money came from the perfume side of things.
Right.
And at the very, very end of her life, when she launched her last few lines of clothing, it was financed by the perfume company, which she did not own a majority share in. So
wow.
So she, so not fabulously rich. O'Keefe had a good amount, but there was the matter of Juan Hamilton, a young man who came into her life when she was very, very old and who took care of her, and there was some finagling with the will.
Always a guy named Juan. Always a guy named Juan. I was going to say
I don't really talk too much about that in the book. Because of what these books are, what Juan did for her at the end of her life was basically she was going blind, which is such an irony for Georgia O'Keeffe. And he basically allowed her to kind of participate in her life and the world longer than she would have become a shut-in. So, nobody's in anybody else's relationship, as I like to say, but there was some funny business with money at the end.
Right.
With Juan, yeah.
And what about Julia?
Because she had no heirs, she set up the Julia Child Foundation. And I think she came from a lot of money in Pasadena, California.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She did. Her father was one of sort of the early land barons.
Oh boy.
In Pasadena, and had money in the Owens Valley and.
Kind of like Bryan, a land baron with horses.
I was going to say.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, in fact,
she had some money, and she was frugal, but she did spend a lot of money on food and on cooking utensils and pots and pans and so forth. But she was pretty frugal, so I think she probably ended up okay.
Right.
Financially.
And what were these women? What was their nationality? Child sounds Irish. O'Keefe sounds Irish or Scottish.
We know Katharine Hepburn was WASP.
Yep.
Waspy. Pretty much all the way.
As waspy as it gets.
Waspy. And then, Coco was obviously French, but her people were from the Auvergne, which is, in every country there's places in the country where, like, sort of the snootier folks look down on them.
Yeah.
And the Auvergne is sort of considered to be backwards and country.
Of course, peasants, Auvergne.
Exactly. But that was her. And then Georgia O'Keeffe was Irish and Hungarian.
Oh. Okay.
And then Julia, was, I think, Scottish and English and, pretty much standard. That's sort of standard early 20th century Western European fare. So,
yeah.
Who else would you want to? If you had you had to choose 4 more kick-ass women to write about? I know. See, I'm full of questions, baby.
Well,
I mean, how about a stand-up comic / sometimes working actor?
That would be, that is a dream come true,
That's
Bryan.
what I'm talking about. I want you just following me around taking notes.
Actually, it's funny because, now the first one of these books came out in 2007, and so as I sort of travel the land, and every once in a while, men will come up to me, and I think this has happened 3 times, which feels like a lot. They'll say, "How about Gary Cooper?" Like, all the dudes want me to do Gary Cooper.
Gary Cooper.
I don't know what that means.
What were you, in a time portal?
No. They come up and say, Gary Cooper.
Gary Cooper. You want a soda pop with that, kid?
I know. And, and I actually keep meaning to look up, like, is there some secret that men know about Gary Cooper that I don't know?
No, they want you to find it out.
Yeah. But then again, a lot of men have been written about. A lot of the greats, whether it's Muhammad Ali, you go, there are a lot of books written about. That market's pretty saturated.
Well, and there's that really great book that Pete Hamill wrote called Why Sinatra Matters.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, you totally. If you haven't looked at it, it's very much sort of in the vein of the Kick-Ass Women books. It's like, here was this iconic guy. He wasn't perfect. His phrasing and the way that he interpreted music changed the whole face of 20th century music. Mm-hmm. He was a jerk. He was great. But this is why he matters to us.
Yeah,
it's really a wonderful little book.
I never understood what made him. I know he's great and all that as far as his voice and stuff, but people use the expression phrasing. Never understood what it even meant. With Sinatra, but whatever.
If I was a singer, I would right now sing you what I mean. But I think it.
I'd be like, there it is.
I'm going to have to get that worked up for my act. But
I love it. Where do you teach writing?
I teach usually in the summer. I'm coming to you from Portland, Oregon right now. There's a summer workshop at Reed College called the Tin House Writers Workshop.
I just did stand-up in Portland. I love that town.
Oh, yeah, thank you. And I do, occasionally, I do some MFA intensives around universities around about, but mostly I try and support myself with my writing.
Yeah.
So
and you do a good job of it. I'll tell you that much.
So far, so good.
Yeah.
So far, so good.
Good writer. Well, what's next? What's the next book?
Well, you asked me about who I might. I always think every Kick-Ass Woman book is the last one because it was first of all it was just the Katharine Hepburn book, and then my editor said, well, there's certainly who else. And so I thought, well, who else? And so, it sort of is just being put together. It's like a house that doesn't have any architectural drawings. It's just you keep adding on one room and then another room.
Yeah. But before you answer who, how has it changed your life when you write about these women? You're kind of taking these steps yourself, aren't you? It's hard not to have, when you research these women, it's hard not to have them influence. The way, at least for me, it'd be hard not to have them influence the way I walk and talk and speak and philosophize and all that stuff, right?
One tries. It's amazing how much you're not able to absorb the wisdom.
Yeah.
You you kind of put it out there, but I do come back and one of the Julia Child rules: solve the problem in front of you. Another rule is to be happy, work hard, and that's part of that not being attached to the outcome, is that if you like your work, mm-hmm. that you really are happy there. I mean, one of the things too, and this is true for all these women, they were not so concerned and obsessed as we are with happiness.
Yeah, that's it.
We are aiming straight on, happy, am I happy? And happiness really is a side effect of living a meaningful life.
I love that. Yeah.
So none of that. So they achieved happiness. I think it was because they had found work that suited them, and they were able to engage in it fully.
So the pursuit of happiness comes not from pursuing happiness, but from pursuing meaning. Pursuing meaning.
It's amazing how much we talk about happiness. It's amazing how many people I know who, until she really confronts this issue, she's never really going to be happy. She's got to go through therapy. She's doing a lot of work on herself. Would you shut up? We're sitting here drinking wine, man, eating a good meal. Take a fucking load off and relax. I can't stand it. It drives me crazy. I'm happy right now. I'll take this moment,
Absolutely. And, don't even get into, we have running water. My legs work.
Oh, we have antibiotics.
I put food in on one end and it comes out the other.
Exactly.
I mean, all the stuff you should be really happy about.
I agree. I agree. We have antibiotics. We have representative government. Now shut up. You're not in North Korea.
It's kind of true. Exactly. We're not in Syria, by the way.
To
completely bring the conversation down. But, So I think the point is, and I'm not the first, obviously, to to say this. I think, in fact, Thomas Jefferson may have said it. It's
but you remind me a lot of TJ. So keep going.
That's me. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot better looking, but still keep going.
Hey, thanks. Mm-hmm. But really, that happiness. You don't like. You just realize one day that you're happy.
Yeah.
You're not aiming at it. It's like you're doing your thing, and you're like, hey, this is pretty great.
I actually like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you think about how the Founding Fathers phrased that, think about how general that is. Life, you're entitled to life, whatever that means, liberty, and you are and the pursuit, not happiness, but the pursuit of happiness.
Exactly.
That's very telling, isn't it? The fact that it's a verb. You're always reaching for this thing. And by the way, I think the fun is in the reach.
Absolutely, and that's something I sort of talk about in the Coco Chanel book. Is that she reached such heights. I mean, at one point she was like the richest woman in France, and the only guy she could date was the Duke of Westminster, was the richest guy in the world. I mean,
oh man.
And was she more happier when she was not necessarily happier when she was up there.
Right.
When she was creating something new, when she was really absorbed in her work and making things, because she was a maker, she was happy.
Hunter and I talk about, and I give Hunter a lot of credit for this, or maybe all the credit. Hunter's an educator and one of the smartest guys I know, and Hunter said, listen, this podcast, we could have a lot of actors and comedians on. The problem is you run out of things to say. And Hunter said, why don't we get a bunch of really smart people who write books, who are doing nothing but writing books, and they want to talk about their work because nobody reads anymore in this world. And this is the kind of stuff, like having a conversation with someone like you who's taken the time to think about this stuff and illuminate us on people that we wouldn't know about, and like Julia Child and stuff. This is what enriches, and whether or not we get 500,000 listeners or not, it's just not that important to me. We were talking about this. You make a choice just to do what interests you and what moves you, and then the rest kind of takes care of itself.
Well, it's completely true, and I wanted to mention I'm doing, as a part of the book publishing, I'm doing this blog project, which is called Live Like Julia, and I've reached out to bloggers, really, and it's turning out to be all across the world, saying, here's the 10 rules, pick one, live it a week, and then blog about it. And people, it's just astonishing what like some woman in Italy is living with abandon. And I already said, you already live in Italy. Like, isn't that kind of?
I know.
There are 9 other rules that perhaps will obtain more, like to work, to be happy, work. But the point is, I guess, is I have no idea whether this means more people are going to buy the book, or whatever the ultimate goal is.
Well, but before, I'll tell you one thing. I think these books make great gifts. If you're a guy out there and you want to impress your gal,
load up, guys.
They should load up. They should get these 4 books,
get the 4 set,
and tie them in a ribbon and go. You know what? These are real kick-ass women, and you remind me of one of these women. And you should check out Karen. You should check out Karen Karbo's blog, because the way you got rule number 1, live with abandon. Rule number 2, play the emperor. Rule number 3, learn to be amused. Rule number 4, obey your whims. Rule number 5, all you need is a kitchen and a bedroom. My favorite, by the way. I read that twice. Sent it to my wife. And rule number 6,
true.
Be happy and work hard. That's all you need.
Did you see in the blog, like, if you can't do the bedroom, make a pie, because a pie is almost sex.
Yes,
right?
Yes, and you have recipes for the pie, man. You go, it may not be sex, but it's almost sex. Yeah, I'll show you my torso. I don't eat carbs. I'm shredded. But the point is, you made me want pie, for God's sake.
And Bryan, your skin looks really tight right now.
Thank you, buddy. That's why they call me Bryan the Kid Callen.
That's all that natural light in there, right?
That's exactly right.
That's right.
It's also shadowing. Karen, you're a joy. This has been a blast, and I think we solved all the world's problems.
You know what? And our work is done here, as we said at the beginning.
That's exactly right. When I'm back in Portland, you got to come out. I'll get you a front row seat, and you can.
Absolutely, I would love it, Bryan. And let me know, and I'll bring my crew.
That's what I'm talking about. A bunch of just intellectual,
my kick-ass crew.
Yeah, just a bunch of intellectual women who write. I love it.
So those are the groupies you want, right?
That's exactly right. So you can judge my how
right.
thematic.
We'll sit in the front row with our arms crossed.
Exactly. You can judge how thematic I am. Oh God, that's just what I need. I love it. I love it. Karen Karbo, thank you so much. And
Hunter
Motz, thank you for hipping me to a very hip woman.
My pleasure.
There it is.
Thanks, everybody.
I'll see you later, man.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
That was great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Another great interview. Thank you to Hunter Motz. Once again, finding these people. I don't know how you find everybody like this. It's unbelievable. He's like, you know what? It's a bit of a sausage fest on the BCS. We need
we need to turn it into
women.
a clam bake.
Exactly. We gotta. Sir, you went to Harvard, sir. I beg your pardon, sir. This is the Bryan. This is a. I used the F word. I got so excited. I guess I'm going to do my Hustler interview now. Is that what I'm doing? Am I? I don't know.
Yeah, at 1 o'clock.
At 1 o'clock. What time is it now? I got an hour.
11:52.
Got an hour to go get some chili or something. Got an hour to go bake a fucking pie.
Pie, that's right.
Yeah. Once again, for anybody listening, I always have a feeling like 6 people are listening. I don't know who the hell's listening to this, but let's see. What are my dates? Donnie B's. Something about Donnie B's. Donnie B's. I'll be in Springfield, Illinois at Donnie B's. It just sounds depressing, but I'm sure it's a great club. October 4th and 5th, and then I'll be October 11th, 12th, and 13th. I'll be at Houston Improv, and the 17th, 18th, 19th. I'll be at Helium in Buffalo. And then I'll be in Calgary the 24th, 25th, 26th. Just go to BryanCallen.com.
And KarenKarbo.com.
And KarenKarbo.com. She's got. I love the blogs.
The blog is. I think it's really excellent.
Yeah, guys should actually read it. There's probably one woman who listens to this, but guys should read it.
And it's Rena, the sound engineer.
It's Rena, and she's right there. All right, guys. Thanks very much. Anna's been snapping photos of us for Hustler magazine, so I'm finally going to be in Hustler.
Every man's dream.
I know. I even opened my legs at one point, but I'm wearing jeans. Peace.
You've been listening to The Bryan Callen Show. Be sure to visit BryanCallen.com for information about this episode as well as past and future episodes. You can follow Bryan on Twitter at Bryan Callen and like him on Facebook. Go to Facebook.com/Bryan Callen Comedy. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.